tonight's speaker is Mr. Dave Crawley, known for his Emmy Award-winning rhyming stories on KDKA. He joined KDKA in 1988, where he reports on the interesting stories of KD country. To date, he has taped more than 4,000 stories, as well as produced a highly acclaimed documentary celebrating 50 years in our hometowns. Before joining KDKA, Mr. Crawley was a news anchor and reporter for WMTV in Madison, Wisconsin. Numerous awards have been given to Dave throughout his career. He has won 12 Emmy Awards, including Outstanding Feature Reporter in the Mid-Atlantic States and the Matrix Printer's Devil Award as the Western Pennsylvania journalist who best exemplifies humor. In addition to being a TV reporter, which I did not know this, Mr. Crawley is also a published author of 4 widely acclaimed children's books. Crawley's Dog Poems was selected as one of the best children's books of the year by the Bank Street Children's Book Committee. Crawley has also had numerous poems published in 9 anthologies, as well as dozens of poems published in 13 national children's magazines. So please help me to welcome Mr. Dave Crawley. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's actually been a while since we submitted that. We're now up to 13 Emmys and 5,000 stories. So we've done 5,000 stories here in the Pittsburgh area in 27 years, but given time constraints, I'll have time to share about half of them with you tonight. So I hope you enjoy, well, probably fewer than that, but I hope we enjoy what we're talking about tonight. I've had the pleasure of doing a lot of stories right here in Bethel Park, and no one can do human interest stories in the Pittsburgh area without going to the Bethel Bakery. How many people are familiar with the Bethel Bakery? I guess just about everybody. In fact, I know they just celebrated their 60th anniversary. Well, I was surprised to see that the Bethel Bakery founder, Morris Walsh, was at the station after 60 years of having founded the bakery. Not 60 years old, but he founded it 60 years ago. And he was at the station for Pittsburgh Today Live. Now, I had talked to him 10 years earlier when Bethel Bakery was 50 years old. And looking at how good he looked, I just figure that, you know, all these diet fads, I figure that the newest one will be mini cheesecake and Lady Locks. I mean, who knew, right? But apparently that's what it is. And also saw that the Bethel Presbyterian Church recently celebrated its 42nd church bazaar. Does anybody belong to that church by any chance? Okay, did anybody go to the bazaar, whether you belong to it or not? Well, it was about 12 years ago we covered the 30th bazaar, and at the time I discovered that the church is almost as old as the United States itself. It was founded 4 months after the Declaration of Independence was signed. So that was quite a track record. That has to be pretty close to a record for Presbyterian or any church here in the United States. And also one of my very favorite stories, it was actually a bittersweet story we did here recently. Your police force granted a final wish for a young boy who always wanted to be a police officer. Has anyone heard of that particular story? Yeah. He was given a uniform. He even made a traffic stop, although the driver that he pulled over had a striking resemblance to the daughter of the officer who arranged the entire affair. The kid wound up letting her off with a warning. And there were very few dry eyes as he was sworn in before an actual, real judge. And Joey Fabus Day was declared in Bethel Park. And at the end of our story, Joey told us, "This is the best day of my life." And he's passed away since then, but those words still stayed with me, and I think they've stayed with a lot of the people who watched. And that shows the kindness, the generosity of your police force. And I think a community really is only as good as the police force itself. And the things they did for Joey was just wonderful. Well, I've been fortunate to cover a lot of best days in my 27 years at KDKA TV. And it seems like, I think my job here was actually meant to be, because long before I came to Pittsburgh, I was a fan of the Pittsburgh Pirates. In fact, 28 years before I came to Pittsburgh. And that was because my next door neighbor was a Pirate fan when I was living in Hampton, Virginia. My dad was in the Air Force. I was 13 years old. And I just became a Pirate fan, and the year I chose to become a Pirate fan was not a bad year. It was 1960. Anybody remember what happened that year? Mazeroski, that's right. And so I wound up becoming a fan. I found out one night that I could, by switching the radio around and listening really close, and we didn't have the automatic punch things we had now. You had to really work at it. And by going real careful, I could pick up night games of the Pirates on one of those oddball stations whose call letters began with a K. I never heard of such a thing. And they were broadcast through the unbiased broadcasts of who else? Bob Prince, right? And so I followed all that year, and I had the little plastic radio under my pillow, and I would listen, and my mom would come in. What's going on in there? Nothing. Just sleeping. That's all. And but I followed them every single game, or every game that was played at night. And at the end of that season, I wrote a poem about the Pirates, and it wound up, I sent it to the local newspaper, and it wound up being the first thing that I ever had published anywhere, because the editor of the newspaper, the Newport News Virginia Daily Press of all things, published my poem in the newspaper. And I woke up that morning that it was in print. I couldn't believe it. I just sent him the poem, just thinking he'd send a letter back saying, oh, that was nice. But it was right there in the newspaper. And I was so excited. I had my bathrobe on. I just ran out of the house. I started running up and down the street, knocking on doors. Hello, do you look at this? Look at this. What do you think? One neighbor came to the door, half asleep, and what do I think? I think you're going to catch a cold if you don't get in the house with that bathrobe on. That was the first day I learned something I've known ever since, and in broadcasting you experience this, and that is that not everyone appreciates what you did quite as much as you do. But, oh, you insist that I do the poem for you? Well, I guess I have no choice then. Well, this is how it goes. It was called An Ode to the Bucks. 'Tis a sad and gloomy day in Pitt. The Bucks trail 7-5 as they try to win their first World Series since 1925. The Bucks last won in 25 and haven't won it since. To broadcast this important game is our old friend, Jim Woods. No, that was his sidekick. It was really Bob Prince. It looks pretty bad for the Pirates in the Smoky City. If they should lose the series now, it sure would be a pity. There's 2 on, 1 out in the last of inning number 8. And cleanup hitter Rocky Nelson strides up to the plate. Nelson hits a fly to left. The fans all give a shout. But Yogi Berra makes the catch. And now 2 men are out. Clemente hits a grounder. He beats out for a hit. The New York Yankee pitcher's about to have a fit. A run just scored at 7-6. Hal Smith is at the plate. He'd like to knock that very next pitch out of Pennsylvania State. There's a long, high drive to deep left field. He really tagged that ball. She's going. She's going. Just kiss it goodbye. It's o'er the left field wall. For the New York Yankees in the 9th, it then was do or die. But the Yankees bounced right back with 2 big runs to tie. The Bucks will win the ball game now if they can only score. If they do not, we'll have to play an extra inning more. Up to the plate steps Mazeroski. Isn't it good to know how it ends? With all his might and brawn, he gives that ball a mighty whack. She's going, going. Did you see this poem already? Mazeroski rounds the bases amid the mighty cheers. The Bucks are now world champions. It's been 35 long years. So that was the very first thing I ever had published, and it was in a newspaper, and it was about the Pirates long before I ever came to Pittsburgh. So I think there's a little bit of serendipity at work there. And coming to KDKA has been like a dream come true for me. I get to do stories that are actually, for the most part, either happy stories or sentimental stories. I don't have to do the stories on traffic accidents and that kind of thing. And it's a real bonus. I really enjoy it. Before I came to Pittsburgh, I worked in Madison, Wisconsin. I was an anchor there, and I did some feature stories. And I was there from 80 to 88. Anchoring, though, is different than most reporting because it's totally live. And so I'm sitting there one day. I had just done a story about, I don't know if you've heard of cryogenics, where you have yourself frozen. Ted Williams did it, you know. And so this was a woman who could not afford the entire operation. She had her head frozen. And I read the story because it was so unusual. And so I'm reading the story, and then we went to a commercial break. And at that point, we always say, don't go away, or coming up. Unfortunately, completely innocently, I looked up at the camera and I said, just ahead. You know, stations pay Nielsen to tell them how many people are watching. We found out that night for free. I came up after the show and they said, what did you say? I said, I don't know. And they said, the phones have been lighting up. Half the people are laughing and say, that's a good one, Dave. And the other half are saying, you think that's funny? And I thought, what? And I looked and I said, oh, no. So those are the kind of things that can happen. Well, I came to Pittsburgh and I found out, I didn't know this before, but I found out that Pittsburgh, our very call letters in radio, Pittsburgh was the very first, as you all know, and I found out later, the very first commercial radio station in the world was KDKA Radio. I also found, in fact, we just celebrated our 95th, or they celebrated their 95th anniversary. We kind of sort of say we because we're kind of connected there. But it all started with a Westinghouse engineer named Dr. Frank Conrad. And he used to broadcast out of his garage in Wilkinsburg, and he had a signal called 8XK, and this was about 1919 or 1918. And he started, it was kind of shortwave radio and that kind of thing, but people started listening to him, not just the one-on-one that radio was typical of doing. People started listening to him on a larger scale. And so he wound up starting to play records a couple times a week. So he was the first disc jockey. And then he ran out of records, so he borrowed music from records from the Hamilton Music Store in Wilkinsburg and returned for mentioning them on the air. So that was the very first, what? Commercial, that's right. He strung a microphone from his garage to his house and turned it on as his two nephews played the piano in duets. That was the first remote broadcast. All of these things started with KDKA. And on November 2nd, 1920, the election between Warren G. Harding and someone by the name of Cox, who in retrospect probably should have won given how bad Harding was, but that's a sidebar. That election result was broadcast on the very first commercial radio station ever. And they took the election results from the Pittsburgh Post. Since they didn't have their own news service, they had nothing. They just were set up in this little box on the roof of a place called the K Building in East Pittsburgh. And so a guy named Leo Rosenberg broadcast those results. And so that was the very first ever. And then they wound up in 1921, they wound up having the first prize fight on the radio. They wound up having the first sporting events on the radio. And then, of course, much later, I started finding out about some of the legends of KDKA. How many people remember Reach Cordick? Now, he was before my time, just barely. I wished I had a chance to hear him, because I did get to hear him. They actually put some of his ideas, his stories on a phonograph record. He was hilarious. And also, how many people remember, this was before Bob Prince, how many people remember a fella who was by the name of Rosie Rosewell? Anybody remember him? What was his main cry for the home run? Open the window, Aunt Minnie, here she comes. Well, actually what he was doing, this so-called play-by-play, he was grabbing, he wasn't at the ballpark, he was grabbing sheets of paper off the teletype at the station, and it would say ball one, and then it would say strike one. But instead of just saying that, he'd say, and a swing and a miss, strike one. Could have been a called strike, he didn't know, but neither did the audience. And so he would kind of play these things up, and then if someone hit a home run, he would say, open the window, Aunt Minnie, and then he would drop a box of glass. Poor Aunt Minnie. There goes another one. And then I found out the very first TV station, not in the world, but the first one in Pittsburgh, was KDKA TV. Except originally it was not called KDKA. Now this is the hard one. This is like Jeopardy, a tough one. But anybody remember the first call letters before KDKA for TV? A little hint, it was the Dumont Network, which did not exist today. And Dumont TV, you got DTV, so it was WDTV. It wasn't until 1954 that it became KDKA. But that very first broadcast was at the Syria Mosque, and it was hosted by a radio guy, even though it was the first TV broadcast here. Radio guy who called himself Uncle Ed Shaughnessy. I think a lot of you remember him. He hosted it, and the musical event that night was with Slim Bryant and his Georgia Wildcats. And I got to know Slim Bryant after I came to Pittsburgh. What a wonderful guy. I was introduced to him by Wayne Van Dyne, who used to do our Take It to Wayne kind of stories. And Wayne loved playing the guitar, so he introduced me to Slim Bryant, and we did several stories with him. He finally passed away at the age of 101, not too long ago. Also met with Hank Stoll. Does anybody remember Hank Stoll from TV? And Hank Stoll had the puppet. What was the puppet's name? Kanish, that's right. Well, he told me a little story about how he came to be a puppeteer on KDKA. He came to the station wanting to do children's programming. So he talked to the head of children's programming, and she said, well, you do puppets. And he says, oh, I do. Yes, I do. This was on a Friday. He said, I'll be glad to start Monday. We'll have a good time. And he went home and he told his wife, we got to find a puppet somewhere. And she said, well, how about this? She pulled out something called, and I had never heard of this, but some of you probably have, something called a darning egg. Do any of you darn socks? Well, they had this thing with a little bulb at the end called a darning egg. And Hank Stoll's wife had that and said, he said, I don't know, put a mop on top of it. And so he went to the station on Monday, and the woman at the station said, that looks like a Kanish. And he said, what's a Kanish? And they said, oh, yeah, that's the name, Kanish. And so he wound up with Rodney and Kanish having a good run of stories, and very funny. I got to work with a lot of legends. I got to work with Bill Burns, remember him? He was there when I came here in 1988. One of my favorite people was his daughter Patty. She was just a real sweetheart and died tragically much too young. But she told me some great stories about her dad. Bill Burns was the first guy in TV in Pittsburgh, and he was always the one that the other stations tried to beat, and he was always the one they never could. Until one day in the mid-70s, remember when the Vietnamese orphans were being flown into the United States? People were adopting them. Well, a plane load of orphans came into what was then called Greater Pitt Airport, and the plane is taxiing in, and cameras for the other two stations and their reporters were standing right here, as the reporters used to do, and KDKA's camera was there too, but no Bill Burns. And according to Patty, the other reporters are kind of looking around, and Bill Burns isn't here. The plane's coming in, and he's not here. They got their camera, but we're going to get it live, and well, not live, but we're going to get it as it comes in, and he isn't. And so the plane comes in, it taxis to a stop, and the reporter for the other station standing there saying, and now the plane is coming down the runway. I see that it's stopped. And as we look now, the gangplank is coming down. And as I look around here on the scene, I notice that the door has opened. And coming down the gangplank, carrying a Vietnamese orphan in each hand, is Bill Burns. You could not beat Bill Burns. The fact that we're now in the trying to raise money for the Turkey Fund reminds me of Al Julius. What a character he was. Al Julius, one day he would be totally out in left field. The next day he'd be the most conservative person I ever heard on the air. I said, what are you? I said, are you liberal? Are you a conservative? What are you? He said, I'm Al Julius. Okay. And he was indescribable. He was the one and only Al Julius. And he had his own opinions, and sometimes they'd be in one direction, sometimes the other, but you loved him either way. And then there was Bill Curry. Remember the Reverend Bill Curry? He used to they called himself the Reverend. He did sports commentaries on KDKA, called himself Sweet Old Bill. He would go into secondhand stores and take the jackets that Bob Prince passed over, and he would have this bow tie and a carnation and the checkered jacket, and he knew he looked crazy and he loved it. And I talked to him a couple years after he went off the air. We did a story with him, and I said, he was very interesting but very controversial. I said, why do they call you Sweet Old Bill? And he said, well, Dave, one day I was walking down the street. A couple people came by, and one of them looked at me and said, there goes that SOB. And I said, yep, Sweet Old Bill. So many firsts have been here in Pittsburgh and in the surrounding area. I had no idea. The Air Brake Museum, the Wilmerding Museum, well, it's not a museum anymore. I shouldn't call it a museum. The former George Westinghouse in Wilmerding, which was a museum, hosted and was the home of a person who was one of the greatest inventors of all time, George Westinghouse. He invented the air brake, and that was just the first of many, many inventions. In fact, they wound up naming a company after him, and of course, I didn't live in Pittsburgh at the time, but I was familiar with the expression, you can be sure if it's Westinghouse. And the story of the air brake, he was like around 20, 21. And he kept bugging engineers of trains to let him ride on the train with this air brake he invented and to try it out. And he kept bugging them because it took a long time. It still takes a long time, but it used to really take a long time for a train to stop. And serendipity again played a role, because one day an engineer told him, all right, come on out. Once we get beyond the city limits, we'll give this thing a try. And this is a true story. It sounds made up, but it's true. They were nearing the end of town, and a horse and buggy went onto the track, and the horse decided it was a good time to stop. So the horse and buggy are on this track, and the engineer is going, I'll never stop on time, I'll never stop on time. And George said, try this. Okay. They stopped, apparently, according to the story, this far from that horse and buggy. The engineer looks at him and said, George, you might have something here. Of course, he went on to have a lot of things. The first federal road came through Pennsylvania, Route 40. That was back in 1811. And we've done stories on the covered wagons that will come up Route 40. I don't know if anyone's ever noticed them. Have you seen them? Yeah, they come up Route 40, and they do it every year in May. They start somewhere, I think Friendship, Maryland, and they come up, and they wind up going all the way to Uniontown. Route 40, of course, originally went to West Virginia. Well, it still goes to West Virginia, but it was called the National Road way back when. And so we wanted to catch up with those covered wagons one of those times and got a really good story. But I heard that we caught up with them just after they had been to McDonald's. I really regretted that we never got the shot of the covered wagon at the drive-thru ordering a Big Mac. Lost opportunity. Then in 1940, we got a little fancier, and the very first turnpike was built, the very first toll road of the modern variety. And that was, of course, the Pennsylvania Turnpike. And they've loved it so much, they're still working on it. It's just amazing. And so it opened on September 30th, 1940, and people lined up. It started at Carlisle and ended at Irwin at that point. And people were lined up early in the morning just to get on that turnpike. Can you imagine? They wanted to be the first. And someone actually did sneak onto the turnpike, and not only was the first, but the very first turnpike traffic ticket. I'm not making any of this up. And so people would get on the turnpike and ride back and forth on a Sunday, paying the tolls each way just to drive on the turnpike. Can you imagine? They drove on the turnpike for fun. World War II was just getting underway. The United States wasn't quite yet in the war, but we had another first. The Army needed a general purpose vehicle that could go on any kind of terrain. A general purpose, or GP, or put them both together, what do you get? A Jeep. So they had a big competition. They had Willys of Detroit, huge. Ford of Detroit, huge. And Bantam Car Company of Butler, small. A very tiny car company. And they had a competition to see who could come up with the very first prototype Jeep. And guess who won? 49 days, they made it to Fort Holabird. They were the first, the Bantam Jeep. And so the Army said, "Oh, that's great. Thank you so much. That's wonderful. And how fast can you turn them out?" Well, it turned out they could turn out 90 a day. And the Army turned to Willis and Ford. "How fast can you steal this model and turn it out?" "Oh, 2 Jeeps a minute." No, a Jeep every 2 minutes. But that was still a lot faster. So what happened was the people at the Bantam Car Company could feel like we helped win that war, but they didn't get the contract. There was a kind of consolation prize. They did get the contract for building the little wagons that followed the Jeep. But after the war, the car company went out of business. So it was kind of a sad ending in a way, but was also just a proud moment, and always will be, for that car company and for Butler itself. Now, the first parachute was also invented by a Western Pennsylvania person, a Greenville man named Stephen Bannock. He tried it out over Frick Park. I bet you didn't know that, right? And the only thing I don't know is who he got to be at the other end of the parachute. Okay, here we are at about 5,000 feet. Put this piece of cloth on you with these straps and jump out. Somebody did it, apparently, and it worked. Whew. Very first Ferris wheel. That was at the Columbia Exposition in Chicago in 1893, built by a guy named George Ferris. It was 264 feet high, nearly a football field in height. And the cars on that thing carried 2,000 people at once. It was unbelievable. I don't know if anyone's made it that since. And who recognizes this sound? And I'm not going to probably do it very well, but it goes like boop, 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 boop. Anybody remember that? My mother used to make me watch the Lawrence Welk Show every Saturday night. But on a bright side, the very first bubble machine was invented here in Pittsburgh at the William Penn Hotel. A maintenance man wound up getting one of those, you know how you blow bubbles like this with those things? And he put one of those things in front of a bubble dispenser and had a fan blowing the thing around, and somehow that made the bubbles. Then, of course, we invented the groundhog telling us what the weather's going to be, Punxsutawney Phil. It all began in 1884, the Punxsutawney Groundhog Club. Now, it wasn't always men in top hats and tails. It was actually kind of just a bunch of just kind of backwoodsy kind of guys, and they started this thing, and they'd have a great time, and they'd break out the booze, and then the highlight of the party was they'd get the groundhog's prediction, and then they'd eat him. True. I think the top hat and tails, I think we can do a little bit better with our animals these days. Speaking of animals, my wife Laurel, who's in the back there guarding my books, she has a Facebook page called Animal Hero. Just one word, Animal Hero. And she said, I can't get out of here tonight without getting at least 20 likes out of you guys, so just promise you like the page, right? That's good, okay. But we love animals, and as luck would have it, of course, we had a cat named Lucky Tiger. And my very first book, I started doing this on the side at Laurel's insistence, I started writing books of poetry for kids. The first one I wrote was dedicated to Lucky, and it's called Cat Poems. And I'm going to have you guys kind of help me with this one. This is a poem called Zip Zoom. How many people have a cat? That's a pretty sparse outline. How many people have ever had a cat? How many people have ever seen a cat run across the room, just dash here and there and here and there and everywhere for no reason? Every day, nothing's chasing the cat, right? Unless it's you. And the cat's not chasing anything. It's seeing something, though, because it's zipping and zooming. So this is what I do when I visit schools. I have the kids, especially if it's after lunch and they're getting a little groggy, I have the kids help me out with this poem. And it's starting to get a little later, so maybe you're starting to get a little tired, so I'm going to have you guys help me. Are you willing to do that? It's very easy. I say, oh, I don't know about that. All you have to do is just repeat what I do. Here's an example. Zip, zong, zoom. Zip, zong, zoom. That's better. Okay, here we go. And what starts out very fast because the tiger's running around, and it ends up very slow because the cat gets tired. So you guys are going to help me here. Here we go. Zip, zong, zoom. Across the room. Zap, zang, zing. Watch him spring. Zig, zag, zop. The cat can't stop. Hurry, scurry. Flutter, flurry. Running, racing. What's he chasing? Could it be that we can't see what makes him dash and clatter crash? Well, good try. Swirling, whirling, spinning, twirling. Oh, very nice. Round and round. He's slowing down. Speed diminished. Now he's finished. Flop, flop, flap. It's time to nap. There you go. I woke you up and put you back to sleep. But thank you very much for helping out on that one. That was really good. Well, after we did cat poems, the obvious one was dog poems to follow. And the one the kids like the best, I think, is the silliest poem in the book. It was so silly that I thought maybe I shouldn't even send it in to the publisher, who is Boyds Mills, and that's Highlights for Children magazine. And I just decided I'm going to send it in anyway. And they published it, and actually the kids like this one the best because it's so inane. It's called, I Bought My Dog a Cell Phone. I guess you don't have to be a kid. And it goes like this. I bought my dog a cell phone. I didn't mind the cost. I figured I could call him whenever he got lost. But when I dialed his number and said, "Where are you now?" his answers were not helpful. Just woof and bow wow wow. So that was a kind of silly one there. But then we have a little more sentimental kind of stories. How many people, even if you can remember way back when you were a kid, it's hard for me to remember that far back, except for the fact that I tend to act like one even now, so that kind of helps. But remember way back, how many of you maybe grew up with a dog? And you still remember that dog, don't you? That's a special dog. I mean, you can get other dogs, and I hope you have, but that's a special dog. And I wrote a poem about that special dog in each of our lives. And this is a poem called Well-Worn Path. You scampered down this well-worn path when you were just a pup. And as we grew, I ran with you. I struggled to keep up. My legs grew long. Your legs grew short. You're happy now, or grew slow, I should say. You're happy now to walk, ignoring all those squirrels and birds you once would chase and stalk. And as we walk, I think of all the moments that we shared. The day we found you at the pound. You looked so small and scared. Those times I fed you table scraps in spite of Mother's rule. The days you greeted me with joy when I came home from school. And as we walk this well-worn path, no longer running free, I hope I was as good to you as you have been to me. And that's one that I think a lot of people can relate to, because we've all, I didn't grow up with a dog, but I remember we had a cat pretty early in life, and we all feel very close to them. Well, here's a poem that's a complete change of pace. The fourth book, I should say, that we wrote was a book called Crawley Bug Poems. I wonder where we got that title from. My wife actually helped me put it together. How many of you, I guess nobody in Bethel Park has stink bugs, right? Oh, you do? Well, I wrote a poem, an ode to the stink bug, so you won't feel so disinclined toward him. It's called Stink. The little brown stink bug lives down by the stream. He suffers, I'm certain, from low self-esteem. Avoided by others, he sluggishly slinks. There's no way around it. The little guy stinks. His dinner is larvae. He has no dessert. Then he crawls under leaves and sleeps in the dirt. In winter, when weather turns bitterly cold, he may enter your house, still smelling of mold. So pity the stink bug, for this much is true. If you lived where he did, you would stink too. So, thank you. Sort of a little ode to the stink bug. Well, I'll share a final poem, and then I'll have entertain any questions you want. I mean, I could read these things all night long, but I know you don't want me to do that. So this is from a book called Reading, Rhyming, and Arithmetic, again published by Highlights. And I dedicated this book to my English teacher. And I sent it to her. And when I was a kid, I tended to kind of act up in class a little bit. I'd always kind of, say wisecracks and that kind of stuff, and nothing serious, I guess. But although when I was in my younger years, I'd wind up by myself in the hallway and with an audience of one. But she always tolerated me, and she actually let me write silly poems the way I wanted to and not the way my mom did. One time I took a poem, I had a poem, she wanted Christmas poems, and so I wrote a poem called The Night Before Christmas at Edgar's, because we've been studying Edgar Allan Poe, and it was filled with all kinds of ridiculous alliteration, because Edgar Allan Poe used it. And my mother told me, "You can't hand that in. You can't and I'll tell you, my mom was very encouraging in many ways, but the thinking outside the box, my mom was in the center of the box. Not 1 inch to one side or the other, the center of the box. She didn't want me to do anything that might go, she was from New England, she says, "It'll go on your record." Well, it probably did, but anyway, I handed in, and she said, "Write a poem about angels." And I thought, oh, geez, I love Christmas, I'm fine with angels and stuff. That's not the kind of stuff I wrote. But I showed it to her, and she said, "That's a nice poem." I crossed my mom up, I handed in both of them. And when it came time to hand them back, my teacher said, "This thing about angels, I almost fell asleep reading it." She says, "The Night Before Christmas is Edgar's. That's one of the best things I've ever read from any student ever." And I went home and I told Mom, and you can guess where that went. And so years later, I dedicated this book to my teacher for giving me the right to be silly now and then. How many people actually may have been a teacher or are still a teacher? Anybody? Oh, we got one in the back. And I know Bill, who I met, you were a teacher, and either you are or you were, and another teacher. Teachers tend to come to these, well, they tend to come to intellectual things. You made a mistake tonight. But teachers tend to come to these things, and I always know that they'll be in the audience. So you can probably relate to this. Have you ever, well, I'm sure it happened to you a lot of times. You ever go out on a Saturday and you run into one of your students, and the student kind of goes like this? "What are you doing here?" This poem is called "Saw My Teacher on a Saturday." Saw my teacher on a Saturday. I can't believe it's true. I saw her buying groceries like normal people do. She reached for bread and turned around, and then she caught my eye. She gave a smile and said, "Hello. I thought that I would die." "Oh, hi. Hello, Miss Appleton." I mumbled like a fool. I guess I thought that teacher types spend all their time at school. To make the situation worse, my mom was at my side. So many rows of jars and cans. So little room to hide. Oh, please, I thought, don't tell my mom what I did yesterday. I closed my eyes. I held my breath. I hope she'd go away. Some people think it's fine to let our teachers walk about, but when it comes to Saturdays, they shouldn't let them out. So that's a little bit of what I do. I do some of the broadcasting, a little bit of writing poems for kids. Like to look into the history of Pittsburgh and the surrounding area. And I love coming to events like this and hoping that you'll all go home and watch KDKA for the rest of your lives. That's why the station likes to have me come out here too. But I'll answer any questions you might have. If you have questions about writing poems or questions about stuff that happens at KDKA or in broadcasting, I can answer them within limits. And doesn't matter, whatever you'd like to ask if you have any questions. Yes? if they had only one day to see Pittsburgh, well, after telling them to watch the 6 o'clock news, I would tell them, of course, to go to Mount Washington. That's the first place. When people visit, I take them to Mount Washington first. Now, if the person had a little bit of time and they start early in the morning, I'd tell them also to go to Falling Water. How many people have been to Frank Lloyd Wright's house, Falling Water? Just an amazing place with a cascading river going under the house. I'd tell them, make sure you ride the incline, because you won't see a lot of those in very many places. I tell them to try to take in a game or at least visit PNC Park if it's baseball season. And I tell them to go down to the Strip District and all the Steelers stuff down there. I wouldn't have them go to Heinz Field because even though I'm a Steeler fan, I think Heinz Field is, I hate to say it, it's functional, put it that way, but PNC Park is beautiful. And I guess I'd have them maybe get up into New Wilmington if they had time, see the Amish riding around in their buggies. And I'd just have them, if they had time again, of course we're running out of time on that now, but I'd have them go to the History Museum, the Heinz History Center, some great stuff there. And then they could end their day by watching the 11 o'clock news. Any other questions? Well, we do have, my wife's back there, if anybody's interested in, I'll sign a book for you if anyone's interested in buying one of the books. And, oh, we do have a question. You'll have to yell. My favorite story on KDKA. I think actually was an early story that I did about a pheasant, of all things. We heard about a farmer down near 84 PA, and a pheasant would come out of the grass, a wild pheasant, and hang around with him, and then go back into the grass at the end of the day. I thought, that is a wild story. So we went down there. 84 is a bit of a trip. And with animals or birds and whatever, or kids, they make the best stories, but you don't know if they're going to do what you need them to do. We get down there, and he goes out there. He called the pheasant John. He goes, John, John. He finally says, I'm going to give up. The pheasant isn't coming out today. And I thought, oh, great. Going to go back to the station with nothing. And then he added, you know, that the only way the pheasant really comes out is when I go out there on the tractor. Where's your tractor? He said, oh, it's in the barn. I said, get the tractor out. So he went out and drove down, and sure enough, that pheasant came out of the weeds. And this is a huge tractor. The tires were this high. And the pheasant's running along beside the tractor, pecking at the wheels, trying to make him get off the tractor and pay attention to him. And we got so many great shots on that story. That probably was, if I had to pick one out, that one stands out. Anybody else? Yes. Have I done any acting? I used to be a ham actor in high school. In fact, I got Best Supporting Actor trophy, which I still have on my desk at home. And I was in a play called Dino, and I still remember the line, your mama and me, we hope you're going to behave now. You can see why I didn't go to Hollywood. But that's about it, yeah. Have you? No? Yes. Well, they come from all different areas. A lot of times they'll come from people's suggestions, and sometimes they'll, in fact now today I got an idea off Facebook. One of my Facebook followers put on a picture of these giant snowmen made of aluminum. The tallest one was a Mama, Papa, and Baby snowman. But they were made out of aluminum bars, and the tallest one was about 25 feet, and then so on down. At Overly's Lights, how many people have ever been to Overly's Country Christmas out there at the Westmoreland Fairgrounds? And so these were out there, and I thought, whoa, that's a great story. And it was especially good because I was looking around. Some days there's nothing out there. I mean, the zoo wanted me to do something on orangutans, and I brought that up in the meeting, and they said, we've done enough zoo stories. So I had to find something else. And that wound up working out really great. So that came off Facebook. Other times, I'll see something, or it'll be a type of season. I've occasionally do rhyming stories on KDKA. And if when the Steelers won the Super Bowl, I did a rhyming story on that, Ode to the Steelers. So that's an event that I did a story on. Sometimes people will just call up or leave emails, and other times I'll just go into the morning meeting, as I did today, with nothing. And they said, well, come up with something. Because it used to be when I first got there, I would do 3 stories a week and really get involved, and I could afford to go and risk maybe a pheasant not showing up. And then I went to 4, then to 5. Now I'm doing like 7 or 8 stories a week. And I mean, that's the way it is. Everybody's working harder and doing more. But we don't get to go quite as far. So you do safe things like the Bethel Park Bakery's 50th anniversary back then. I knew they weren't going anywhere. So yeah, we get story ideas from all over the place. The best way to do it, if you have an idea, is email me, dcrawley@kdka.com. And I pass it on to the news director, and if she likes it, we do it. Anybody else? Well, thank you so much. You guys were a great audience, and if you want to come back, thank you. I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.